Hello and welcome to the 2021-2022 Program Monitoring Random Validation Phase 1 Process Training for Title I Part C Migrant Education Program. In this session, we will be providing you with an overview of the Title I Part C MEP Interstate Coordination requirement. First, we would like to share some things to keep in mind regarding this random validation process. Please note that documenting overall compliance for a program requirement may require several forms of documentation to be maintained locally and available upon request by TEA and/or auditors. Another thing to note is that to ensure overall compliance with program requirements, LEAs should refer to the program guide and/or other program-related resources that reference the multiple forms of documentation required to be maintained locally. In addition, keep in mind that documentation requested for submission during the random validation process may not include all forms of documentation that are required to be maintained locally. If meeting documentation is to be provided for any requirement, please consider the following. The standard meeting documentation that an LEA should maintain locally includes the following: meeting agendas, meeting notes or minutes, and sign-in sheets. Please note that due to COVID-19, documentation for virtual meetings is an acceptable form of documentation. Given the increased use of virtual meeting environments, participant rosters that include the meeting title, meeting date, and stakeholder names and roles will be acceptable substitutes for the more traditional sign-in sheets. This eliminates the need of a participant signature. Now let's talk specifically about the requirement for documentation for interstate and intrastate coordination. Keep in mind that interstate means within the state and intrastate is out of state. This requirement has to do with promoting interstate and intrastate coordination of services for migratory children to provide educational continuity through timely transfer of pertinent school records, including information on health, when children move from one school district to another, whether or not such a move occurs during the regular school year, and this can be found on Section 1304B3. The required documentation for this program requirement includes Migrant Information Exchange Notifications, or M6 notifications. The acceptable documentation includes M6 notifications for moves for students into your LEA. Emails showing correspondence for interstate and intrastate coordination are also acceptable. If no migrant student records were requested during the school year, then the following documentation must be readily available upon request. Documentation that shows why there was no request for records from another LEA or had no need for this type of service. For example, TX-NGS reports showing no students or no student mobility. This would be the unique student count reports and also the report for mobility. What does documentation look like for item 1.1? This would include the M6 notifications sent to the LEA or sent from the district when a migratory child leaves to another LEA within the state or out of the state. What are some of the issues that may result in an improvement needed status for this requirement? This will include audible documentation requested was not submitted, documentation submitted does not reference interstate or intrastate coordination, documentation from a prior year was submitted instead of the current year documentation. For item 1.2 of this requirement, we are looking at documentation that shows why there was no request for records from another LEA or had no need for this type of service. Remember that this includes reports from TX-NGS that showed that no students in the current year were present in the district or that there was no mobility for students present. What are some of the issues that may result in an improvement needed status for this requirement? This could include audible documentation requested was not submitted, documentation submitted does not reference interstate and intrastate coordination, Documentation submitted does not align to the Interstate and Interstate Coordination. Documentation from a prior year was submitted instead of the current year documentation. Thank you so much for joining us today. And here's our contact information. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us and we will respond to you as soon as we can. Thank you.